What's up, Bills fans? It's been a long time since I've done a recording, a really long time. So it's way past, and we're 4 days removed from the draft. So I'm a little late to the dance here, but I wanted to do a review, emotionless, just let everything sink in. These guys are on our football team now, so let's rock and roll. We always have our favorites going into the draft. We develop man crushes. That's just the way it works. So with this, I'm going to talk about each pick, how it affects the roster, short term, long term, what type of player is he, and across the board, what we saw from one to all the way down to seven was just physicality, that blue collar mentality, that culture that McDermott, Bean want to foster and just continue to have infused in that locker room. First pick in their second round, first pick having been traded for Diggs at 22 overall, and it makes you wonder. They got down to 22, and apparently CeeDee Lamb was probably the highest rated wide receiver on their board. From what everything you've heard, everything we've heard, um, would they have traded down at that point? Would they have made a move to trade down? We'll never know. They traded it for Stephon Diggs, but first pick in the second round at 54 was defensive end from Iowa, AJ Epinesa. The pick gives the Bills even more flexibility. It's the last position group I thought they would have went to given their offseason and free agency. You had Butler, you had Addison, you had, Ed Oliver added with their first overall pick at 8 last year, Quentin Jefferson. They had Daryl Bam Johnson. So they really, really attacked the defensive line across the board, whether it was free agency and with their second round pick in AJ Epinesa, really just gives them so much options. The way I look at it now, the way that their lines are going to be almost like hockey lines, lines in a hockey team where you're going to have this kind of line, that kind of line, just a big physical line, a more fast, athletic pass rushing line, a run stopping line. They really just have so many different options now on that defensive line group. And today they just signed Brian Cox Jr. Everybody had their jokes for that one if you know the history behind his father. But AJ, a long power rusher, plays a lot faster than he timed and performed at the combine. He's not a burner. He's not a guy that's going to blow off at the edge. He's going to win with physicality, power, hands. And the thing that I love about him most is that he's just a worker, and the way he instinctually gets to the quarterback and just without even no effort. And I always wondered this about defensive ends when you see them have a quarterback dead to rights, just knock the ball out. Just knock the ball out. Don't I mean the sack is sexy, but just get that ball. And he just seemingly does that with little to no effort. And if you look at him man to man, pound for pound match up against any of those four tackles taken in the top, in the top 13 as it stands, whether it's Wirfs, Thomas, Becton, Jackson, two of those in our division, he matches up against any one of those. Sorry, Jackson wasn't one of those tackles taken. He was taken later down the road. But then you have, excuse me, Wills was taken by the Browns, Thomas by the Giants, and then Wirfs by Tampa Bay. He matches up against all of them very well too. But Jackson, he was the bowl game MVP against that kid. He lives in that kid's nightmares. So with him in the division, even Becton, it's just a lot more comforting adding a youth player like that at that position. Now Hughes doesn't have to rush himself back, can get spotted a lot more in practice, have those veteran rest days, those maintenance days. Addison is a young 32. Um, so they really have a lot of options there coming off that edge. He could kick inside. You could have Addison outside, Hughes outside, Oliver, and their line can cause havoc on passing downs and long down and distance situations. That was the 54th pick overall for the Buffalo Bills. Now on to the 86th pick, and it ended up being a guy I really, really liked. When it was getting close, I was nervous. I was wondering if it was going to be wide receiver, offensive lineman. The way it happened was the receivers that went off the board, boom, boom, right. Raiders had back-to-back picks at 54, I believe, or was it 80 and 81? They had back-to-back picks in the 80s right before the Bills picked. I think it was at 84 and 85, and it was Lynn Bowden, Brian Edwards, two guys the Bills had interest in, but the next guy was sitting right there for him on a tee, a guy that they admitted they tried to trade up for, but advantageous. It worked out for them. Zach Moss, just a nimble bull. He reminds me, his running style reminds me of a bigger Thurman Thomas. Just the light feet, the quick feet, the bounce, the little jump cut that he has, the way he's able to just fall forward for yards. And he's 20 pounds bigger. He's a lot faster. He timed in the 4.6s, but when you see him get a crease and get out in open space, he has an extra gear that I think only lends itself to game action, game situations. He's not a guy who's going to time fast. He's a guy who's going to play fast. A lot better receiver than his numbers indicate. He gets his hands on the ball. He's got soft hands. Did not have a fumble um, at Utah last year. Cousins of Sonoris and Santana Moss, and he's a guy who can finish in the red zone, could get down to the goal line and just punch the ball in. Just provides a lot more options and a balance between him and Motor. I think there are going to be a 1A and 1B. People said, "Oh, Motor, why they draft a running back there? You got to have two." There was times where, Singletary needed spotting. Gore didn't have the juice. This kid brings that juice. He brings those young legs, just a really nice balance, and a guy who has a lot more breakaway and a lot more electricity in his running style than people kind of think. He's just a banger. He's a lot more than just a banger. Was really excited about this pick, Zach Moss. Next pick in the fourth round, the first wide receiver for the Bills comes off the board from University of Central Florida, Gabe Davis, a kid that I didn't really hear about the Bills having much interest in. That doesn't say that they didn't have interest in him. I mean, I don't know everything. I'm not even close. So this kid, looking at him, looking at his play style, I go back, didn't really look at him in the lead up during the draft that much. Can't even lie about it. Then I started watching him a little bit. And what I do when I look at a player is I'll go look at him against good competition. He wore out Paulson Aldo in their game against Stanford, a guy who would have been a first-round pick this year, probably be a first-round pick next year, cornerback from Stanford. He worked him well, really ran the LSU secondary ragged in a bowl game, scored a touchdown on him, drew 3 penalties, an illegal contact, 2 pass interference, and caught 4 balls for 60 yards. 1 was a touchdown. Should add another touchdown, but the ball was thrown way over his head, but he was wide open. Creates a lot of separation at the top of his stem. He really stacks a DB and is able to he just seems to just, you ever see wide receivers, they look like the cornerback is right on their hip. This kid, when he's running a post, he just gets that 3 to 4 yards like that. Physical, tough, just goes up and really attacks the football with a lot of physicality and just fearlessness, and that's what you want, and that's what this Bills offense has needed. A wide receiver with some attitude. It's a my ball attitude. It's not a 50-50 situation. It's an all me situation, and you saw the video of him running routes right after he got drafted. He was pumped. So Gabe Davis to the Buffalo Bills in the fourth round. Hopefully he comes in. And the thing I like about this now, it was all thought before the Stephon Diggs trade that, obviously our first round pick is going to be allocated to a wide receiver, especially one of this caliber. And when you get a guy like Diggs, who's such a proven commodity, a Pro Bowl caliber receiver, a guy who's going to be the true number one, it stacks the receivers accordingly. You move down and you're returning your receiving core from last year in totality. Now your Brown is your number 2. And now you have Beasley at the number 3. It just allows them so much more to work with. They're not on the other team's best corner. They're not attracting coverage. They have a lot more space in which to work. Diggs is really going to do all that heavy lifting and has the ability and the want to do that. And that kid like Davis can come in and just, you know, take his time, especially in the climate that's happening right now. Just take his time, gradually get his feet wet, acclimate, and then you'll start to see probably as the season second half of the year, the last quarter of the year, you'll start to see him pick up his game, play faster, play with a lot more edge, a lot, just a lot more confidence. But you never know. I mean, if he ends up catching 30 balls for this team, let's just say 500 plus yards, about three to five touchdowns, to me that's huge. Bills lost 4 or 5 games in total by that many touchdowns anyway. So if he can alone add that, that would be massive. And this team does desperately need to score more touchdowns in totality. Now the next three picks are very, very interesting picks. The next one is going to be the most interesting pick. One I definitely didn't see coming. I don't think many of you saw it coming. In the fifth round, Bills go Jake Fromm, quarterback, Georgia, a guy who's that prototypical clipboard holder, coach's son, just football knowledge through the gills, team guy, big time winner at Georgia, had Alabama on the ropes before Tua came in and just stole the show. Did not have a good year last year, lost a lot in the receiving room. I believe he had a change at offensive coordinator. Lost his top two running backs, so he had a lot of turnover around him, and he's not the most physically gifted guy. He's a lot like Matt Barkley in a lot of ways. He's an anticipation thrower. He's a pre-read guy. Likes to know where everybody's going to be lined up. Likes to know where he's going with the ball before the play starts. And it's been talked about as being a second pair of eyes for Allen in the coach's room and on the sideline. And I look at it as Barkley had one good game with the Bills. He hasn't had a lot of success in the NFL, and that game was against a Jet team that was pretty much packing it in before the bye week for a coach and regime they knew was on the way out. And last year, and the few times Barkley played, was it the fourth quarter against the Patriots? Majority of the last game against Jets, I mean, he wasn't great. A lot of turnovers against the Jets. Got some tip balls and the one batted ball that ended the game against the Patriots. So for me, if this kid comes in and fair and square just is even or even edges him, even if it's even, I think obviously Fromm keeps the job. You save money there and you move on. Allen doesn't need a veteran babysitter anymore. I think he's well past that. He's got a veteran quarterback, former backup quarterback, as his coach in Ken Dorsey. He's got one as his personal quarterback coach in Palmer. So an offensive coordinator he's been with for 3 years going on now. So I just think he's well past that. If they want to keep Fromm over Barkley, they have no problem with it. Now the next pick is a guy in the sixth round, you could arguably say might have the biggest impact on the roster. Shock, not shock. It made a lot of sense if you line it up with the fact they tried to bring back Chase McLaughlin, the guy they had in preseason, released him on the cut down to 53. He had a cup of coffee with the 49ers, then ended up finally landing with the Indianapolis Colts. Bills tried to claim him. Went to the Colts due to record. And Hauschka had been struggling, really settled it down, but still from 50, just won for his last 10, I believe. And he just, Bass's leg is just, it is TNT. You see the no-step 50-yard field goal, the one-step 60-yard field goal. And now with a guy like that, potentially kickoffs are null and void. If it's Vedvik winning the punting job, he's just going to wear his leg out booming, or they can alternate, kicking off. So you're not wearing each guy's leg out. If, and I say, but if Bass wins that job as the kicker, now once you're on the 40 or at the 42, you're in field goal range, depending on what the game situation dictates, because each field goal is predicated upon, what's the score effect, what's the situation like in the game, on the field, weather-wise, I think that he could be a huge ad. And you look at the Cleveland game, you look at the Houston game. You would have had a leg like that on the field. You could have potentially won both of those games. Went on to play against KC. Maybe had a first round bye. Maybe you hit that field goal before the first end of the first half against the Patriots. A completely different game at that point. And but you just didn't have the leg in Stephen Hauschka. I just don't think he has it anymore. Ever since that hit against, was it the Jets when Henry Anderson cheap shot him out? He's just not been the same kicker. He's going to be 35. He makes about 3.5. Got this kid, again, even if it's even, Bass easily takes it. So I think looking at it right now, he's probably the guy who might have the biggest impact on the Bills roster in 2020. Now on to the seventh round. A guy, you're in the seventh round. You're looking for guys, an area of need, depth. Thought this position was going to come a lot earlier, to be honest with you. I was shocked that they waited, but I also step back. I throw my hands up outside of a couple of guys. Was it both in the same year? It was Vontae Davis and Philip Gaines. The Bills have done very, very well with cornerbacks and defensive backs as a whole. They really seem to have a finger on the pulse of that position. Say McDermott's a DB savant. That's what I call him. Just seems to really have that position down cold. Um, Dane Jackson from Pittsburgh, a guy who was a guy that did decently at the Senior Bowl. He's got a ton of athleticism, a basketball background. He just hasn't had, I guess, the coaching maybe that you need at Pittsburgh. Even though Narducci turns out some good players, I just don't think that with the 20-hour rule that they can get that development. We all know that this Buffalo Bills coaching staff prides itself on developing players, and that's kind of the 3 to 4 silo, organizational thing is player acquisition, whether it be, free agents, draft, or trade. That's in line with culture and in player development. And I think the Bills have all those three are working in concert, and it's really paid dividends for them. And you're seeing the trajectory point up. But that's the Buffalo Bills 20 class. It was very, very, just one common theme. People will say there's still the blue collar, the toughness. I did like that they added tough players, physical players, guys that want to play that type of man-on-man ball in games that I felt like against the Patriots, like against an Eagles team, even though they're not known as a physical team. I just didn't like. There was a little bit of a physicality element missing that I just didn't like. Baltimore was a even more prime example of that. Even though the Bills hung tough there, I think you get a batted ball by an Epinesa, a forced fumble. You pick up a few extra first downs or a big explosive with Moss. You win some of those games. You have Bass in the coffers for long field goals. You win some of those games with players like this, as opposed to come down to the edge and last possession games, one score games. You can really start to pull away in some of these games and not have to bite your fingernails off towards the end. All right, guys. Thanks for watching, subscribing, whatever you do, don't, whatever. I don't really solicit for that kind of stuff. I just appreciate you viewing, period, let alone all the extras that you'd have to go through. The comments and everything are great. I love the interaction. Thanks, guys, so much. I appreciate it. And go Bills. Hopefully we'll be seeing some sports soon, and we'll all be getting back to regular life soon. I know you guys want it, deserve it, and hope everybody's staying strong and just not letting this thing get you down too much. Love you all. Go Bills.